What is up, my beautiful gemstones? Welcome back to my channel, and if you're new here, just welcome. My name is Gemma Jade, and tonight is our fourth night of the 7 Nights of Halloween special, and we are going to be discussing strange and mysterious history of the Ouija board. As many of you already know, I insist to all of you that unless you are properly trained, you shouldn't be messing with the Ouija board at all. I insist in that direction because I know the perils and dangers that await unsuspecting victims who think it's nothing more than a board game or that it would be a nice parlor game to pull out while having a few drinks and having guests over, but there's so much more to it than that. Keep in mind here, guys, before you go crazy in the comments, that I am discussing the history of the Ouija board, not spirit boards in general. Last year around this time, I discussed more specifically some encounters of people who thought all of those same things I just said above and who lived to regret it. But today I thought that maybe if people understood better what this board is all about and a little more about why it's so dangerous, then it would make more sense and you would all be more inclined to stay away from it altogether. Possibly understanding all the more what makes it such an incredible tool, but only when used by a trained professional. It puts people in real danger, guys, not only from evil entities and creatures, but it puts your soul and your energy in danger too. And because that's not something everyone can see, like literally visually with their eyes happening, could end up being deadly, and no one would ever know that that was why someone died. Mainly no one. So, in my opinion, the Ouija board is one of, if not the most easily accessible and readily available tool for communicating with the dead and reaching out to the spirit realm. It's either respected as a potent way to access the realm of the dead in a very serious undertaking, or it's considered a cheap parlor game that kids and drunk adults alike could use and have some fun with, of course, depending on what you believe. It's been the basis for innumerable books and television shows and the subject of many horror movies, with one of my most favoritist of all time being an old movie called Witchboard. If you haven't seen that one yet, please go ahead and check it out. It's cheesy 80s, but in the best possible way, and well worth it if you're a horror movie buff and fanatic like me. Is the Ouija board a trick of the mind, a portal to other realms and dimensions, a way to contact your deceased and mourned loved ones, or something else altogether? I know it isn't just a game, and it should never be a way to try and contact deceased loved ones or relatives, but let's take a look at the strange and somewhat bizarre history of the board and its mysterious legacy. Let's jump right in. The Ouija board is somewhat infamous in and of itself. It's also rather innocuous. Its name is derived from both the French and German words for yes. It's a flat board with the written numbers 1 through 9 on it, and the whole alphabet, the words yes, no, hello, goodbye on it as well. What's on the board will vary depending on who made it, but that's the basic form of it in the simplest terms. Various symbols and designs usually flank all the words, letters, and numbers, and there's almost always a heart-shaped wooden or plastic planchette with a see-through circle inside of it so that you can accurately see what the alleged spirit is trying to spell out to you when it's using the alphabet provided on the board to talk to you. All things considered, it does seem rather harmless. 2 or more players are supposed to sit around and lightly place their fingers on the planchette and ask questions that they have of the spirit or whatever else they conjured up with it, and the entity is then expected to spell out a response. The planchette is the key as it seems to move around of its own volition, and it's the simple premise that's gone on to spawn all sorts of strange and oftentimes terrifying stories about what's happened to people who took the board game and didn't know what they were getting into. They didn't know what they were doing while using it. So, how did the Ouija board come to be so notorious, and how did it all begin? Well, I'm glad you asked, because that's exactly what we're about to dive into here today. It turns out that the history of the board is almost as bizarre as the stories that always seem to pop up around it. The Ouija board, as we have come to know it today, was marketed in the early days right after the Civil War. The year was 1891, and in Baltimore, Maryland, there were 2 businessmen, Elijah Bond and Charles Kennard, who owned and ran their own company called the Kennard Novelty Company. The patent for the board was filed the year before in 1890, but I'm not going to get into the actual patent process because that's a whole other video, and that complicated process is a whole story in and of itself. Allegedly, it took so long basically because the patent office demanded that the 2 men carry out for them a demonstration of how the board worked to prove that it indeed worked as they were advertising it before they could even consider issuing a patent for it. So the test consisted of the patent officer having Elijah Bond and an associate of his sit with the board and have it spell out his name. The board did it, and that was enough for the patent office to issue the Kennard Novelty Company the patent. They also allowed it to be labeled as a toy or a game at the time, and because of the demonstration. It was being marketed as a toy from the very beginning, and no one even considered that it could be something dangerous, something other than a simple party game. Skeptics say that Elijah and his associate there with him that day simply found out the guy at the patent office's name some other way, like through investigative work, but that's just the skeptics, and we won't ever know the truth anyway. The original patent that was given that day offers no information or explanation as to how the board actually works, except to say that it was through the, quote, involuntary muscular motion of the hands of the players or through some other agency, end quote. It just makes me giggle. It's the or through some other agency part that gets me every time. That explanation only served to deepen the board's mystique and to garner even more interest in it, as it came out at just the right time when people were becoming more and more interested in spiritualism, as it was called back then. The game was marketed as, quote, the wonderful talking board, end quote, and it was designed to be nothing more than a simple parlor game. It was similar to the other so-called talking boards, which relied on a type of automatic writing popularized in the Song dynasty of China way back in the 1100 AD, in which a planchette was used to spell out answers to questions. Obviously, and as most of you probably already know, the Ouija board became most popular during the height of the so-called spiritualist movement that happened in several countries and that basically took the century and most of the world by storm in the late 1800s. The people involved in the movement believed that those types of boards offered a relatively simple and easy way for regular and average everyday people to speak with the dead, and they saw Bond's product as the go-to choice for all types of self-proclaimed mediums and mystics across the United States and abroad. Neither owner of the Kennard Novelty Company were spiritualists, though, and they had basically created the board because they were good businessmen. They knew it would be smart right at that time to capitalize on the fad of the spiritualist movement. The board's allegedly mysterious history and odd marketing, which pandered to families looking for a new game for their family game night and mediums looking for a quick and easy way to communicate with the dead, and the game flew off the shelves in response. There were many people who were just curious as to what the board was all about, who also bought it for that reason. It wasn't specifically called the Ouija board until 1901, when a man named William Fuld took over the production of it. He claimed that he asked the board what it wanted to be called, and it spelled out Ouija. That's also an ancient Egyptian word that means good luck, and the name seemed to stick. I mean, it obviously did, because that's what we still call it to this day. William Fuld ended up receiving sole credit for the board, and it's his name that's most often associated with it too. This was all happening while the spiritual movement was very popular, and spiritualism itself, as it was called back then, was very much in vogue and popular. At that time, trying to communicate with the dead wasn't seen as being into anything strange or bad, and because of the Ouija board's instant popularity and how quickly it was selling out everywhere it went, the market was, of course, flooded with imitations from other creators and sellers trying to capitalize on the times. Fuld had a lot of competition in those days with the board, but his remained the king of them all, basically. It was the easiest to use, and that combined with how innovative the letters and words were, along with the way that the planchette was designed, were partly why Fuld's version was the best and most popular board. From the 1920s on, in particular, the Ouija board reached soaring heights of popularity to the point that by the time the 40s rolled around, so about 2 decades later, the company producing them had to build new factories in order to keep up with the insatiable demand for this board. Side note, guys, and I think we talked about this either in Afternoon Talk or in Live Intuitive Oracle in the last week or so. Can you imagine how many doors were opened up, how many entities released, how many attachments gained, how many deaths and devastations caused by this? There were. Depends on what you believe, but I'm just telling you my perspective, my point of view, and my opinion. This is bad. Through the years, the Ouija board maintained all of its mystique and spiritual mystery, and way back then it was even used by some members of law enforcement to try and get answers about crimes that they were working on and having some trouble solving. I'm sorry, but to me, in my opinion, that is like using the freaking magic 8-ball to try and get answers about something. But that's just as far as I'm concerned, and for different reasons than you may be thinking. But like I said, like I always say, to each his own, live your life. Along with everything else going on with this board, there were stories starting to circulate, and that had been for a while, about how people were having strange experiences, odd encounters, and even scary things happening to them while using the board or immediately after. There were many people who came forward to say that they had been told to go out and kill someone by the board, and in fact, it's even said that Fold's own death, which was from a fall from a roof he was up on while supervising the insertion of a flagpole, was heralded by someone's Ouija board. He went about constructing that building, and the one that the people were saying that he was going to fall off the roof, and he did fall off. People had been telling him for a while about it, and they all warned him not to go ahead with building whatever it was in the first place. Unfortunately, he didn't listen, and it cost him his life. For whatever reason, the Ouija board maintained its insane and seemingly inexplicable popularity all through the 20s, 30s, and 40s, and the game was sold to the Parker Brothers Company in 1967. Even after they bought it, sales continued to rise, even with all of the strange and somewhat sinister stories and all of the paranormal phenomena surrounding it. The Ouija board would continue to be a booming business. It was the movie The Exorcist, which was released in 1973, that started the Ouija board being aligned with evil and satanic forces. Because of that movie, the so-called game went from being incredibly popular to a tool of the devil almost overnight. Various Christian and other religious groups began to decry the board as a tool of Satan and a portal to evil. At the same time, they became somewhat of a fixture in horror films, and it didn't take long for the board's reputation as a fun party game and gimmick changed to one of insidious spiritual and demonic malevolence. At some point, the toy company giant Hasbro bought the game, and in recent years, it's enjoyed a resurgence in its popularity. There are many people, myself included, who believe that these boards do somehow have the ability to channel or contact demons or random spirits and should not be taken lightly or played with at all. I couldn't agree with that sentiment more. How Ouija boards work depends on who you ask. The official scientific explanation is that the boards work because of something called the ideomotor effect, which is explained by MU, quote, "This essentially means that our muscles are automatically and unconsciously moving in response to outside cues, and since this movement is carried out with the awareness of the ones doing it, the whole thing seems very anomalous and bizarre, the whim of some outside force. Automatic writing and dowsing rods are other examples of phenomena thought to be caused by the ideomotor effect, and it is all molded and shaped by your expectation. According to this theory, it's not the work of outside supernatural agencies, but rather the power of the subconscious human mind, which could pose its own mysterious phenomena in itself, but which is not paranormal in the end. It's tied to a concept called a quote-unquote dissociative state in which the subconscious mind is working independently of the conscious thoughts and motor functions. Simple experiments wherein the participants are blindfolded have shown that the ability to spell out any meaningful word goes out the window, which should not really be the case if spirits were truly controlling the planchette," end quote. I would like to see more of those studies. Blindfolded, it goes out the window. I don't know. Maybe that does make sense. I just don't have, I guess, that kind of, so-called scientific or rational mind like that, especially when, like, I can see what's going on. I wonder what it's like to be able to second guess that. As you can all probably guess by now, I think that explanation, the ideomotor effect, is complete nonsense, total BS. It comes about as close to accurately explaining how the Ouija board works as the genius brain fart explanation to explain sleep paralysis by the scientific community. I know that many of you are just waiting to put in the comments that the history of the talking board or of spirit boards in general goes much further back than what I've seemed to cover here. And you'd only be partially right, though. I did mention that I'm talking about Ouija, not spirit. I titled this The History of the Ouija Board specifically and have aptly covered its history here. However, I do want to talk a little bit about how it all started to the best of my knowledge, so let's move to that before we end. As I briefly mentioned earlier, talking or spirit boards, as far as researchers can tell anyway, got their start during the Chinese Liu Song dynasty, which was in the 5th century AD, and they were made even more popular later on by the Song dynasty era, particularly used for people to communicate with the dead, but it wasn't like a mere instrument, like a telephone, and it was actually considered for most people to be a form of necromancy. In Fuqi, the writing was created through, quote, a sieve to which was attached a short stick. It was generally held by two persons at either side to trace characters on sand or ashes. The characters were supposed to have been produced by the gods, end quote. It's also said that Kennard was just an investor who took credit for the whole thing once he started looking for investors, and that Elijah Bond had actually teamed up with the coffin maker / undertaker named E.C. Reich, and they produced the boards, making them out of the same wood Reich would make coffins from. I could go on and on and on here, but I won't. And please don't think I'm ignorant to the fact that witches and pagans and Wiccans all over the world have always used some similar form of divination to the Ouija board long before it became popular, and throughout the ages they did so. These are just meant to be videos to help us kick off for Halloween, and I'm not trying to get too serious here. I would really, really like it if you guys humored me as I left off here with some tips for Ouija board safety. My number one tip would be don't use them at all and stay safe, but I know a lot of people just aren't going to listen to that advice, so here it is. Here's 8 things you should never ever do with a Ouija board if you absolutely must use or play with one. The first tip I have for you is to never ever use the board in your home. Yes, you heard that right. I know people want to play where they feel most safe and most comfortable, but it's not as counterintuitive as it may sound, so hear me out. People like me and other trained, well-versed members of the community can use them in our homes because we know how to protect ourselves and how to block out all of the negativity, therefore not allowing any sort of evil or malevolence to enter our personal spaces, such as our homes, our bedrooms, etc. If you are someone who doesn't know how to deal with something evil or even lower vibrational that happens to come through the board and make itself cozy in your home or your energy, hear me out. The more personal the space is that you choose to use the board in, the easier it is for a demon or low-level evil spirit to attach its energy to yours. Make sure you go somewhere neutral, or at the very least somewhere you or someone else using the board with you doesn't have any emotional or personal connection to. This is choosing the lesser of two evils, though, and you should still be aware that whatever you're trying to keep from your energy and personal space can then be able to attach itself to any random person wandering around in that area for whatever reason, and for as long as the entity chooses, so you're putting other people in danger as well. You will unleash something, and there's a great chance it'll be evil or at the very least lower vibrational, so that's a risk you also need to be willing to take. Of course, there are exceptions to every rule, but don't say you haven't been warned. The second tip I have for you, if you absolutely cannot help yourself and must use the damn Ouija board, is this. A lot of people lately, including trained professionals using the board, have been seeing whatever it is that's coming through the board starting to count down numbers on it, going from 9 down to 0. So what does that mean? That means you say goodbye immediately and never, ever keep talking to what I like to call the countdown entities. In my experience, and what I've recently learned about this particular phenomenon, is that this is something to keep you distracted while the evil inside of the board prepares to enter your space permanently, maybe even your energy. Kind of like a countdown for a nuclear freaking bomb. Say goodbye, try again later. I doubt you'll get a different result when you do, because evil is relentless that way. Gemma tip number 3, do not invite whatever it is that you're talking to show any sort of proof outside or off of the board that it's there. Especially don't dare anything to show you any proof or anything like that. What happens when you do is that you are essentially giving that entity, whatever it may be, permission to leave the board and enter the physical realm in the space you're in, and that's not a good thing because you don't know exactly what you're dealing with. Spirits get confused, and the evil and lower vibrational ones will flat out lie to manipulate you. They will do anything, say/spell anything to be able to stay in this realm, even if only for a little while. Don't give it the opportunity. In asking for proof of presence outside of the board, remember that average spirits don't have as much strength as something like a demon does, and you'll almost surely will get much more than you asked for. You do not want that kind of responsibility on your conscience. Trust me. Tip 4 is simple. Don't continue to communicate with the spirit that does the figure 8 thing on the board. That, This happens a lot more often than you would think, and it isn't cool or a good sign at all. I've come to find that this doesn't actually mean eternity like most people think, at least not in this specific instance, and it actually is more likely that it symbolizes evil and eternal torment of the spirit, meaning your spirit, not the one you think you're communicating with. Tip 5, never play alone. Ever heard the phrase, the more the merrier? Well, never is that more fitting than when it comes to using a Ouija board. The first reason is simple, and that the spirit or spirits connected to that particular board who are trying to come through, they have to outsource the energy they need in order to respond to and communicate with you. You don't want your energy being drained that way. Trust me, as a medium who has it done constantly without a moment's reprieve, it is not good for you. Not physically, mentally, spiritually, psychically. The more people who are participating means the more sources the spirits or spirit has to use from. If they're upper vibrational, if they're good, they'll use a little bit, from each person. They won't want to use too much. Practically, if there's at least 3 people, one could be taking notes about what the entity is saying, though I wouldn't listen to a word that comes out of these boards anyway. The main reason I suggest that you shouldn't play alone is because you are really more susceptible to either possession or at the very least to attachment when you're by yourself. You'll be very vulnerable, and whether you think you are or not, you are much more easily manipulated when you're by yourself with one of these things at least. Tip 6, do not show fear. We tend to receive what we put out into the universe, and with the Ouija board, it's no different. First of all, fear is the #1 food for evil and malevolent entities, so you will be an all-you-can-eat buffet for these types of spirits, and they will immediately be attracted to and try to attach to you. Plus, if you're putting out into the universe or sending out the energy that something there is to be feared, then you will bring in something that needs to be feared. It's simple, spiritual, and universal math. We bring in whatever we put out. This is also why I recommend, for as ridiculous as it sounds and as hard as it might be to do, smiling or even laughing when you're having a sleep paralysis episode of the paranormal kind. Also, don't ask questions if you fear the answer. And I'm not saying laugh and joke while you play the Ouija board. That's disrespectful. Asking, when will I die, is scary. And if you aren't going to like the answer, not that you should believe anything the board says, did I mention that already? Don't ask that question or any questions. Tip 7 is another simple one. Always make sure you say goodbye. It doesn't matter if the board is in the middle of spelling out an answer for you or whatever is happening. It sounds stupid to skeptics, I know, believe me. But first of all, it's just good manners. On the off chance you do draw in a good spirit, you have basically summoned it, whether it's connected to you or the board, so you've then made it stop doing whatever it was doing on the other side to come and converse with you. It's only polite. The main reason, though, that I mention this is because you are leaving the connection open when you don't say goodbye to the Ouija board, no matter what the circumstances are. If you start to feel sick or you start to get scared, it doesn't matter. Under no circumstances should you leave that line of communication open. Think about a telephone, and if you and the other person don't both hang up, there's a chance someone could hear at least some of the other person's conversation after the call is ended because the connection is still there, even if you remember later to go back and say goodbye. If it isn't the original spirit or entity you're already communicating with, you still have just left a line of communication open to that original entity, and it could end up becoming an attachment, and very quickly too. You're basically giving it permission to come with you wherever you go in our own world, as you've invited it to speak by using the board in the first place. No matter what, always say goodbye at the end. If you need to end the session suddenly, if you need to leave or go somewhere, don't be rude, but just say goodbye. And if the planchette doesn't immediately move to the word goodbye, which if you're dealing with a higher vibrational or good spirit, it will do just that, move it there yourself and cover the whole word. My final tip, even though I have so many more, guys, is this. Do not ever use this board while you're under the influence of alcohol or drugs, not even a little bit. It's very dangerous because your senses are dulled, your defenses are down, and you leave yourself open and very vulnerable to whatever comes through that board. I know most people can't see energy, but if you could see what just 3 glasses of wine looks like on a person, you'd probably never drink again. I mean, energetically. Or maybe you would, I don't know, but I do know it's imperative that you remain in control while using the Ouija board, and you absolutely cannot do so while under the influence of anything at all, ever. Also, if you're under the influence, you could end up asking the same question more than once or not understanding what the entity is spelling, and spirits get annoyed just like we do, and you don't want to run the risk of pissing off the wrong spiritual being. Guys, I say this because I care. Stay away from the board altogether. I will say that you should be comfortable when playing, so if you absolutely must use one in your own home or at a friend's place, use sage, incense, crystals to protect yourself. But again, please don't. Just leave it alone. I love you guys too much to see you suffer. That's all I have for you tonight, guys. Please give this video a big thumbs up if you enjoyed the content, if you enjoyed hanging out with me, if you enjoyed hanging out with one another in the premiere, and if you're enjoying my 7 nights of Halloween so far. Check out the description box for important linked ways to donate, my books on paperback and Kindle on Amazon, other videos, my live stream schedule, email address, how to win or purchase boxes, sprays, mists, all these things that I create and craft and make on my own. Be kind to each other, guys. It doesn't cost anything. Never accept anything less than others being kind to you. If nobody told you today you're amazing, you're incredible, don't let anyone tell you you can't do something. What you put out into that universe, you get right back. So make it positive, keep it simple, believe in yourself like I believe in you. I've got your back, all right? Always go in grace, smile at a stranger. Happy Halloween.